Brother Van is back there with his little leg scooter. Ken's over here with his walker. He's next to a fellow with a cane. Please show your AARP cards to get a discount on tomorrow's lunch. There is no lunch tomorrow. It is, I believe, 19 years now that we have been coming out here to St. Charles. Not always on the first weekend of December. We skipped one year. I was allowed to do that because I was in Ukraine that year, and so that's acceptable if you're in Ukraine. But the first year was during June, as I recall. But other than that, it's always been the same weekend in December. And coming up on 20 years, I look back at the pictures, and then all I have to do is see how I feel, look at Van, look at Ken, and go, yep, time is passing us by. And the day will come when you will realize you need some younger people doing this, and I will realize the same thing. But that day has not yet arrived, at least for this year. And so I welcome you. Normally Van comes up, briefly says, well, here's James, and then sits down. So we skipped over the flowery introduction. Van's not into flowery introductions anyways. So my name is James White. I assume you know that, or you probably wouldn't be here. Hello, brother. How many? Well, I'll tell you, it's good to see the Lord got you through another year. Me too. You sort of look for people in the certain spots, and sometimes visitors take somebody's spot, and just don't know, and then that person ends up. So if Van's if Ken's ever sitting over here, I'm going to be completely lost. I'm going to have no idea what in the world I'm doing. It's going to be really confusing, but. That's certainly the case in most churches. In the church I'm at now, it's not that way. We don't have assigned seating by any stretch of the imagination. But most people, you know where they're supposed to be sitting. And if you want to get some people into a bad mood on the Lord's Day, sit in their seat, and they won't hear nothing in the sermon, nothing. It's terrible, but it's just the way it is. But welcome, thank you for coming out. Believe me, we have. Had this event on much colder, nastier evenings than this is by a long, long shot. We've had some real cold ones, and at least it's cool enough to somewhat put me in the holiday spirit, even though just a couple weeks ago I was in Inverness, Scotland, and that was holiday-ish enough. I can assure you of that. Wasn't there for a long period of time, but when you have to walk very, very carefully because everything is covered with that first layer of ice that forms, it was quite an interesting experience. But anyway, this weekend, our intention is to, whenever Ken and Van and I start talking about this weekend. Things happen over the course of a year, and we ask the question, what subjects shall we address? I can only address a certain number in a meaningful fashion. And it's interesting that much of what we will discuss this evening would not have in any way, shape, or form been even on our radar when I first started coming here. In fact, if that was around the year 2000, I think it was it around? Well, I'm sorry?
2000.
Yeah, it was 2000, yeah. Thankfully, we had survived Y2K. Some of you remember that. Hopefully you've been able to get rid of all the extra stuff you had stashed away in 1998 and 1999 for the huge apocalypse that was about to take place. And you've purged any evidence from your library of the number of books you bought about Y2K up to that time period. Some of you don't even know what Y2K was, do you? That's the scary thing. There are people voting in the next election that weren't alive to know what Y2K was. Oh, man. Yeah. Anyway, I'll have a granddaughter that's going to turn 10 next, 10? Yeah, 10, oh my goodness. Anyways, but think of the things that have happened since 2000 that prompt the discussion that we're going to have this weekend. And for those of you who are younger people, You need to understand that us older folks find the speed at which things are changing to be extremely troubling. When I grew up, the world did not change every time you got up. Every day you were not assaulted by a massive flood of news and even honestly new words that you had never heard before. When I would get up in the morning, things would be pretty much the same thing, the same way they were when I had gotten up a year earlier. That's not how things are anymore. And that has contributed to, I think, a division between our generations as to how we view the world. The problem is that we in the church find ourselves behind the curve, so to speak. We are trying to catch up. And over the past couple of years, within what we would call the conservative church, the church that believes and continues to believe that the Bible is the Word of God, that it is His Word to mankind, that God knew that the modern day was going to exist. God knew that these issues would be facing us. And so He gave us His Word, and we can continue to trust His Word. But we find ourselves in a day where we are having to expend a tremendous amount of energy to figure out how to apply biblical principles in a wildly changing culture and shifting landscape. And we don't do it perfectly. We make mistakes. We don't realize how often we have been dependent upon those who came before us to give us good guidelines and good standards, but they didn't face some of the things that we're facing today. And as a result, we feel uncertain. It's like being in an earthquake. The ground beneath us is supposed to be nice and firm and unmovable. But we live in a day where that ground is moving a great deal, and it causes, especially us older folks, a great deal of consternation because we thought we knew what the rest of our lives was going to be like, and it doesn't look like it's going to be that way. And it looks like we're going to be having to address issues we never, ever, ever, ever expected to address, and my grandparents could not begin to conceive of why we would be talking about the things we'll be talking about this weekend. They would look at me and no, it's not possible. You're going to be talking about people who were born males who think they're one of 133 different genders, and this in the church? What do you mean? How can this be? They would have had no way of understanding. But that's one thing to talk about us older folks. It's another thing to then think about my grandchildren and what they're going to be facing. And I think that's more important, obviously, is how do we, especially those of us who are in the older generation, provide that foundation? How do those in the middle generations who are raising those children face the reality that I can guarantee you, I've taught over in Germany a number of times, and there is no homeschooling in Germany. You're not allowed to do it. You have to send your children off to government indoctrination. And obviously that requires of Christian parents in Germany a tremendous amount of extra time undoing the indoctrination that the government gets to engage in, if you can even do that. That's coming. If you don't think that's coming, you're naive. Listen to our political system right now. Listen to the candidates for one particular party. Give them the presidency, the Senate, and the House for 4 years. And you don't think that's going to happen? Of course it is. And so, what kind of a foundation are we giving them? Do we even feel ourselves prepared? Do we think we have the foundation within ourselves to then communicate to them? That's really the question at that point. There are so many challenges heading our direction that it sometimes just, you want to stop the world. I want to get off. When you And I've said this before, I don't know that God designed us to have the kind of flood of daily information that most of us expose ourselves to. I don't know how to avoid it. Oh, yes, I do. Go buy a lead mine in Colorado and hide in it. That would do it. But it'd be sort of hard to fulfill your command to be salt and light from a lead mine in Colorado. It would be might be more cozy for some of us, but that's not how we can do things. And so we are overwhelmed with stuff coming at us and trying to fit it into a coherent worldview, and to try to do so in such a way where we are still connected to the past in a culture that detests the past. I mean, think about it. In our culture today, the stands that are being taken in our culture today would say that every single president and senator prior to the year 2000 was how many phobes can we come up with now to describe all of them? Every single founder of the country, every single president, every single senator, every single representative was a something phobe. And we should tear down any pictures we have of them. You remember the high school last year that painted over the huge mural of George Washington? Because he was terrible. Everybody in the past was terrible. We are the new paragons of virtue, though no one like us has ever existed. And so we have an entire, history, people in history are just hated. They're just hated. And we as Christians, we can't do that. Christ has been building his church. You can't look back on everyone who claimed to be a Christian and say, oh, those people were just terrible. You don't have to turn them into paragons of perfection either. But you can't imbibe this cultural hatred of the past, which has resulted in a complete disconnection from the past. You know the old statement, he who forgets the past is doomed to repeat it. But the reality is, those of us who study history have to add the part, and those of us who know history are forced to sit here under torture watching us repeat it over and over again. And we as Christians can't help but know the past. Our scriptures point us to it. Our scriptures give us the past. And so we cannot help to be just a little bit on the uncomfortable side of what we are facing today. A couple of weeks ago, let's just think about language for a second. Well, first of all, let me take a poll here. How many of you back in high school had as one of your assigned reading books 1984? Okay, all right. I remember it well. I did not realize it was a book of prophecy. How about Brave New World? Brave New World? Yeah, not quite as many. Also prophetic. I have a t-shirt. I haven't worn it yet. When you get to my age, t-shirts aren't the best look anyways. Notice frumpy sweaters are much better after age 50. I have a t-shirt that has a Venn diagram on the front. And the top says 1984, the bottom says Brave New World, and where the two intersect, you are here. And it's true. And it's true. And we as Christians should have seen this one coming. I didn't. But we as Christians should have seen this one coming. The abuse and control of language in our day. We are people of the book. We should have seen this. We sit here and we talk, how many times over the past 19 years have I talked about the exegesis of a text of Scripture? And you need to know what the meanings of the words are, what the semantic domain is, and the grammar and the syntax. And we've talked about the Trinity and all sorts of stuff like that. We've gone in-depth into the language to demonstrate certain things, certain unchanging truths from Scripture. So we should have been the first ones to see when the language started being used as a weapon, by redefining it, by changing its meaning. You're not only changing history, you're changing the meaning of words. Could someone please explain to me how you can take the word abortion and call that health care? That's like saying that carpet bombing is home improvement. makes just as much sense. And then there's new words. I mean, I was going to look this up. I wonder if there's a website. I bet you there is. I'll bet you there's some way of using Google for this, though Google would lie to you because Google spins things. But I wonder when the term transphobe first appeared in the English language. It did not exist in 2000, I can guarantee you that. When I first came here, a what? What would that even have meant? A transphobe. Now we hear it all the time. And in fact, we already have in some states in the Union the placing into the law civil penalties for misgendering. There's a new word, misgendering. Who ever thought? Now, I guess we could have understood it, because how many times you've gone, oh, what a cute little baby boy. It's a girl. Sorry. But that's understandable. Why is she in blue? Okay, I mean, she's only 3 weeks old. Put her pink, I would have guessed right. But that's not what misgendering means anymore. How about dead naming? You can get kicked off of Twitter for dead naming. Let me ask, how many of you know what dead naming is? Okay, so how many of you are going to admit you don't know what dead naming is? Okay, I'm going to dead name right now, Bruce Jenner. Yeah, that's dead naming. It's a dead name, so you can't use it. And you can get kicked off Twitter for referring to Bruce Jenner as Bruce Jenner, because it's not Bruce Jenner anymore. So it's dead naming. You didn't know that? Oh yeah, try it. We'll never hear from you again. At least on Twitter. Yeah, dead naming. I watched that man win his gold medals. How many of you are old enough to remember those Olympics? Yeah. And I'm sorry, he's a grandfather. He's a grandfather. First thing I thought of when I heard about this was, are you the most narcissistic, self-centered person on the planet? You have grandchildren. You have a responsibility to them. What are you thinking? Dead naming. Then we had one just a few weeks ago, a new word. I had never heard it before. I listened to it on the briefing with Dr. Moeller. He was talking about again, federal case. The judiciary is being used as the mechanism of accomplishing all these things, of course. And there was a federal case where a Roman Catholic hospital had lost a court case. See if any of you remember this. See, this comes at us so fast that we can't even keep up with all of it. There was a case within the past month where a Roman Catholic hospital lost a court case. They were sued when a biological female, we used to call them women, sorry ladies, when a biological female came into the hospital and asked to have her female apparatus removed. She wanted to have a hysterectomy. Total hysterectomy. Nothing wrong with her. There was no disease, no prognosis of disease, no family history of disease, nothing. Wanted a hysterectomy. Roman Catholic moral law says you cannot remove healthy organs from a healthy body. That this is a fundamental degradation of the body made by God. You can't alter it in this way. And they refused. So they sued. And she, he, whatever now, won. And in the court's ruling, a new word I had never, a new phrase, word, whatever, I had never heard. They had refused proper, ready? Gender care. Gender care. Gender care. If I had heard the word gender care in the year 2000, when we first came here, I would have stared at you and gone, could you please define that? And I don't know if in 2000 we could have even defined it in a meaningful fashion. And if you understand history, you realize 2000 was yesterday. In the history of the world and in the development and rise and fall of nations and cultures, 2000 was yesterday. We all know that right now we are in a situation where if you are selected to host the Emmys, that's the last thing I'd ever want to be asked to do. You know what's going to happen to you. Everything in your past, everything you have ever written, everything you have ever said is going to be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. And what's going to happen is you're going to be held accountable for everything you've ever said based upon today's standards that did not even exist back then. Can you imagine if you went back into, say, the 1970s and held someone accountable to today's language standards from the 1970s? Is there anyone who would survive? Of course not. Of course not. It's absurd to do that. But that's where we are. That is how focused upon the now our society has become. And the now can change tomorrow. All you have to do is have some superstar come out, some movie star come out. Who was it that last month, another new word, she was the Hermione in Harry Potter. Yeah. What was the term she used of herself? She's not single, she's self what? Self-coupled. Self-coupled. What I'm talking about requires some kind of explanation, doesn't it? I mean, for some people, it's in the water. There's got to be something in the water. The black helicopters have been buzzing around long enough, it's finally taken effect. Okay? That must be. The actual answer is found in the reality that this next generation is the first generation that is uncoupled. It's uncoupled from the historical Judeo-Christian tradition that gave meaning to law, that gave meaning to life, that gave transcendent meaning to culture. It gave us a foundation for relating to one another in culture because we're all made in the image of God. In fact, let me make, and I'm going to come to this later on, but let me make a statement right now. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s could not happen today. Couldn't happen today because it was based upon Judeo-Christian concepts that are now mocked and derided. So when Martin Luther King talked about his children being judged by what? The content of their character, not the color of their skin. That was appealing to a common social capital that has now been not only completely abandoned, but anathematized. Anathematized. That's why we see what's happening in our culture today. That's why we see language being used the way that it is. And we in the church, we don't want to be on the front lines of figuring this stuff out. And I have said over and over and over again, I didn't see it coming. Mainly because I was focused on other things, but I guess I should have. You certainly can go back and you can find prophetic words in the insights of people like Francis Schaeffer. There are some things Francis Schaeffer saw where this could go. He did. And some others had some ideas, though it would be sort of difficult to see how technology was going to combine with this. Similar with 1984. I mean, there was some technology in '84, the view screens and things like that, which are that's Alexa, which we voluntarily put into our own homes. I disconnected mine recently. But I didn't see this coming. And one of the reasons I didn't see it coming in the church is because I had a false belief. There are a lot of people that say I never admit to being wrong about anything. That's not true. I had a false belief, and the false belief was this. I thought amongst Reformed evangelicals, however you want to define that broadly or narrowly, I thought that our belief in sola scriptura would act as a bulwark against what I knew was already there in what I used to call liberalism, I now call it leftism. I went to Fuller Seminary, the same Fuller Seminary now being sued for kicking out a woman who divorced her husband and then married another woman while a student at Fuller. And shortly before she graduated, the school found out she had done that, and they kicked her out of the school. And so now Fuller is being sued for violation of Title IX. Folks, the folks on the left are totalitarians. They do not believe in liberty. They do not believe in allowing for a school to have Christian beliefs. And they will not stop until every school is either on board or closed down. That's what they absolutely intend upon doing. And every school and every person in charge of a school or groups in charge of a school need to know that's exactly what's coming. There will be a fundamentally different paradigm of Christian education within 20 years. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. Anyways, suing Fuller Seminary. Well, I went to Fuller Seminary. And I went to Fuller Seminary. Fuller Seminary was a whole lot more conservative than it is today. And it was way to my left back then. I've described myself often as Fuller's token fundamentalist when I was there. And I don't mean fundamentalist in the modern sense of that term, but believing in inerrancy and things like that. So I knew what was out there. I had to read the liberals. I understood their worldview. And I'm glad I had to do those things. I didn't enjoy it at the time, but in hindsight, I've figured out why that was such an important thing to have happen. But here's Fuller. And Fuller's getting sued over something like this, which, hey, I'm thumbs up to Fuller. They'll probably end up giving in, but thumbs up for at least doing the right thing for a moment. Anyways, these days, that's a little bit of a shining light in what we're facing. I thought that in the walls of the believing church, the necessity of being able to present a biblically based, positive presentation of your beliefs would keep this stuff out. Because how can you give a biblically based, positive presentation defending something like Bruce Jenner? On every single level of biblical theology, God is creator, man is his creation, Jesus is teaching in Matthew chapter 19. Everything that could possibly be brought together, it is self-evident that no apostle of Jesus Christ, no prophet, no anyone ever had the idea that mankind has the autonomous capacity and power within himself to determine his own reality when it comes to gender. And yet, I was wrong. Now, what was I wrong about? I guess I was wrong as to the commitment that we had made to sola scriptura. But I was also wrong in underestimating the power of cultural interpretation, because that's what we're hearing. You heard this but especially in people like Matthew Vines, and the hermeneutic of love. The hermeneutic of love. And we found out very, very quickly that not only were there many people sitting in the pews, and we have been talking about this for a long, long time. We had been talking about the fact that a lot of people coming into our churches, they were coming in with a very worldly worldview and then getting a slather of religion over the top. What the society does is it comes on with a sandblaster and gets rid of the stuff on the top. And you find out, yeah, they still have a worldly worldview. And we're going to be seeing that more and more as more and more societal pressure comes to bear upon the church to be silent and to not just be silent. Scratch that. Silence is not enough. Tolerance is not enough. It's not only affirmation, it's celebration. It's celebration. If you understand the totalitarian mindset, again, 1984, remember what they did in 1984? Remember what happened to that poor guy? Those of you who didn't read it, it is your reading assignment. Because you will be stunned. What was it? It was written 48, I think? 1948, I think. Yeah. And it's absolutely prophetic. Absolutely, we're seeing it. It's like the other side is using it as their textbook. Oh, let's change language. Good, newspeak, yay. Let's do it. That's what they're doing. But the person, the man who is the central character in 1984, was it Winston? Yeah. They couldn't just kill him. They had to break him. They had to destroy the fact that he loved something other than Big Brother. Then, once you're broken, then they could kill you, because now you didn't mean anything. But they had to break you first. Totalitarianism demands that. You see it in China today. This is happening in China. Why do you think there are over 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in China today? They are seeking to break them because they want them to have as their ultimate commitment fidelity to the state, to Xi Jinping. Xiism is now, Maoism's going out, now Xiism. Same thing in North Korea. And so it's not, you have to celebrate these perspectives. You can't just be tolerant of it. And so I just assumed, well, that's never going to impact us. Then something happened at the beginning of last year. Something happened in March of 2018. I don't know if we'll find out someday in some historical records that there was an email sent out and it's go. We've got everybody in position. I don't know. But I just have to sit here and I have to look at our Reformed seminaries, whether Presbyterian or Reformed Baptist, our institutions, Southern Baptist Convention, most of the other Baptist conventions that have already been taken over. But all of a sudden, it was like somebody flipped a switch. And all of a sudden, the language started pouring in. And it wasn't just one perspective, it was all of them coming in at the same time. Now, culturally, you and I should remember clearly when the switch was flipped in our culture. June 26th, 2015. When was it? What was it? The Obergefell decision. I remember I was teaching at a Reformed Baptist camp up in Flagstaff, Arizona when that happened. It's the day after my anniversary. How many of you have read the Obergefell decision? May I suggest it? It's obviously online. I read it, I listened to it, I converted it to MP3 and listened to it while driving back from Utah that year. And I have never heard a more childish, silly presentation than what Judge Anthony Kennedy presented. We're going to redefine marriage in our country because children of same-sex marriages might feel marginalized at school. So we're going to fundamentally change everything in our country because some kids might get picked upon. I was bullied all the time. You don't change the entirety of society on that kind of a basis, but you read it for yourself, and then read the dissenting opinions. Wow, were they good? There just wasn't enough of them. And of course, our society was never intended to be run this way. I hope we all know this, right? You all know that John Adams very plainly said the Constitution is for a moral and religious people. It is thoroughly inadequate for the governance of any other. I mean, I think what's going on right now in Washington is all about one woman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know it, because we now know that's where law is made. It's not made in the legislative branch anymore. They've failed at that. They can't do it anymore. So it's all made in the Supreme Court. And I'm not sure that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually still alive, personally. I'm a little concerned. CGI and stuff like that is so good these days that, well, look, Princess Leia is still in Star Wars, so are you sure? But I seriously, what's going on in Washington right now is all about one thing, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Because she's not going to make it through another 4 years. I mean, cryogenics, time travel, something, I don't know, but she's not going to make it through another 4 years. Yeah, that's what I've heard, yeah. That's only for the Star Trek fans, and the rest of you are going, what? Swedish? No, never mind. You're missing the point. But, no, seriously, because that's where these decisions come from. Did you notice, think back to 2015 for just a second. In 2015, it's like as soon as that came down, the entire focus switched from homosexuality to transgenderism. Just like that. It's like, okay, we got that one, here we go. Just don't tell me that that wasn't planned. It was. And now we have, like I said, you can be silenced on public media if you refer to a man who won gold medals in the Olympics as a man who won gold medals in the Olympics. That's what happened there, but it didn't happen at the same time in the church. But it wasn't much longer until now you have the same stuff coming into the church. This was not something I ever wanted to be involved with, but if you're going to address where the church is today and the challenges we're going to be facing, it's a whole lot easier talking about Mormonism. It's a whole lot easier talking about Mormonism. We were just up, don't get me wrong. There's a huge area of ministry right now in Mormonism because Mormonism's changing and people are leaving. But a lot of them don't know where to go. Did any of you see the almost hour-long conversation Jeff and I, my fellow pastor Jeff Durbin and I had with the two Mormons coming out of Mormonism just a matter of weeks ago at the General Conference in Salt Lake City? We really believe they came to faith during that conversation. If you haven't seen it, look it up. It was, we covered about everything there was to cover. And you know what's really amazing, just in passing? I just got word this week that BYU has approved, Brigham Young University has approved, the week after General Conference in April, I will be doing an on-campus dialogue with one of the leading BYU scholars in New Testament textual criticism on a Christian Mormon view of how you do textual criticism in the New Testament. This is the same professor who produced, there's a new translation of the New Testament for Mormons. It's really good. It's accurately done. It's a good translation of the New Testament. But he doesn't use the Textus Receptus, which is what the basis of the King James was, which is used in the Book of Mormon. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. A lot of really interesting stuff to talk about. But can you imagine? I could not imagine in 1984, is that when it was? I'd have to look at my little triple that I bought at that time, Book of Mormon, Dr. Coe's Price. I put the date in it. When we first went up there, the idea that in 2020, I'd be having a dialogue with a leading BYU professor on New Testament textual critical issues on the campus of Brigham Young University? Not a possibility. Not a possibility, and it's happening. Lord willing, it's happening. Pray that it will. I mean, it's been approved, but I'm concerned that there's going to be some pushback eventually. But so it's a lot easier to talk about that stuff. It's a lot more enjoyable to talk about that stuff. My grandchildren already know what it is to witness to Mormons because Eric, my son-in-law, my daughter Summer, have been having missionaries over, and so the kids already know how to pray for missionaries and what Mormonism believes and all that stuff. And I don't know if any of you follow my daughter Summer. She has a webcast called Sheologians and is a writer unto herself, but she was mentioning on Facebook recently that her favorite memory from favorite thing to do in childhood was to go out to the Mormon temple with her dad and witness to the Mormons. And it makes you feel really good. It really, really does. You know, it wasn't any of the cruises or trips or anything else. It was going out and witnessing to the Mormons that she remembers the most. And I think that's really special. But all that stuff is important. But when I think of those grandchildren, that's not going to be the biggest challenge they're facing. No. The biggest challenge they're going to be facing is the absolute demand of the society around them to celebrate that which nailed Jesus to the cross. That's what they're going to be facing. And they will have limited employment opportunities, limited educational opportunities, limited freedoms in this society in a matter of years if they are not willing to bow the knee. Now, some of you who listen to my program know that I've used this illustration, and I love church history. I know Van loves to throw church history in once in a while for the fun of it. There's illustrations. That's what Ken says anyways. Ken sort of tells on you, Van, so just so you know. I think, I'm not sure, I haven't added it up, but I'm pretty certain that, Ken, do you think you've texted me probably around, what, about 20,000 times, probably, over the past couple years? Not enough? Probably more than that? Okay, yeah. Because I love church history, I cannot help but recognize that the day we live in has a lot of parallels. Oh, many differences, believe me. The technology aspect is something that is unique to our experience, but the conflict between the lordship of Christ and the claimed lordship of Caesar is not anything new to Christians. Not anything new at all. The problem is the vast majority of Christians, they don't know how the early Christians dealt with that very pressure, because we don't talk about it. But if you have not heard the story, if you have, this will only help you to tell it to your grandchildren even better. But in the early centuries, the great conflict was seen in the reality that the Roman Empire, think about what Rome was like. They had the greatest technology that anyone had ever seen in warfare. Now, it's because they were willing to learn from others. So they would just say, oh, that's a good idea over there. They'd incorporate that. That's good over there. And eventually, they had the best tech. And they could beat anybody. The whole reason that the 10th Legion spent the time it did at Masada in Israel. Anybody ever been to Masada? Amazing, isn't it? The ramp still sitting there. Can you imagine the tech in the first century to do that, and it's still sitting there? The main reason they even did it was because they were Romans and they wanted to. We will not allow anyone to flaunt themselves at us. We have the power to do what we want to do. And they did. And 900 Jewish zealots died as a result. But if you don't know the story of Masada, I highly recommend it to you. You find it to be truly fascinating. There was a great 1980s TV miniseries done about it. It was really good if you want to track it down. I've got it on DVD somewhere. Anyway, the Romans had conquered the known world, at least the Mediterranean basin and extending out from that. And there were a lot of kingdoms and a lot of religions and a lot of ethnicities. How do you keep something like that together without having a soldier on every single street corner? Well, there's a number of ways that you do it, but one of the ways you do it is you encourage inclusivity rather than exclusivity. And so you could worship whatever God you wanted. And there were all sorts of pagan temples, and that was great. But once a year, you needed to come before a Roman official, and he'd have a little altar of incense. And you took a pinch of incense, and you'd throw it on the altar, and it would puff up, and you could smell the incense. And when you did so, you said, Kaiser Kurios. Kaiser Kurios. Caesar is Lord. Caesar is Lord. Now, you weren't saying Caesar is Lord and my gods aren't. You weren't saying Caesar is Lord and my neighbor's gods aren't. You were saying Caesar is Lord along with all these others. But what bound us all together, you see, was you said Caesar is Lord. And so you recognized the validity of Caesaropapism. Caesar representing the religions of Rome all together. He was called Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, the highest of the priests, representing all the religions in of himself, the great strength of Rome. Caesar is Lord. Well, the Jews had already said we can't do that, and they had worked out something with Rome even before the birth of Jesus. But this new sect, which Rome eventually figures out, at first isn't, this is just a dispute about your law, you all go do something. They assumed the Christians were just Jews. They eventually figured out, no, this is a different group. They didn't have the material wealth and influence that the Jews had, and so they had a problem. They couldn't say Caesar is Lord. And the problem is, once you put that pinch of incense, you received something called a libellus. A libellus. It's a document. And the document says you have fulfilled your civic duty. You have demonstrated your faithfulness to the Roman state. And when you had that, then you could enter into legal contracts and buy land, and it was sort of what we would call a driver's license today. And so what were the Christians supposed to do? Well, some Christians decided the best thing they could do was, there were plenty of Roman officials that, need a little extra vacation money. And so, under the table, a few denariuses under the table, and you could get a libellus without having to put the pinch of incense on the altar and say Caesar's Lord. Well, the problem is, a lot of Christians, when they found out you had done that, would say, it doesn't matter whether you said it or not. You did something that told others that you had. Almost all the early divisions in the church weren't due to theology, they were due to apostasy. They were due to the fact that the church had to struggle, because you'd have waves of apostasy coming through, and then when it left for a while, you'd have people wanting to come back into the church who had apostatized. And the church didn't know what to do with them. Some people wanted to let everybody come back in. Some people said you can never come back in. There were everybody in the middle. And this is what caused all the schisms. The biggest schism in the early church was the Donatist controversy in North Africa. And there were as many as 700 Donatist churches in the days of Augustine. And where did that come from? Exact same thing. It was a division over apostasy. Now, what does that have to do with us? Real simple. We are being asked to offer incense on the altar and say Caesar is Lord. And it's coming at us a little bit at a time, all the time. And we have to think seriously about how we're going to respond to that. We need to think about it as bodies of believers, so we have collective wisdom. But individually, as heads of households, we likewise have to really give serious thought. I mean, like, turn off the football game. Serious thought. Like where you actually don't have music playing. You know, silence, that thing that makes millennials go, oh, where are my headsets? You know. I created my own feedback with my headsets. Must mean it echoes in here. It's empty. Yeah, okay, all right, that's how that works. We might have to seriously give special attention to asking the question, how in my line of work, in my culture, am I being asked to give to the state what belongs only to Christ? Now, there are certain forms of theology that would say that can't happen. That really can't happen. You only have to worry about the spiritual aspects of things, and it's almost a Gnostic idea that, you know, you've got your spiritual stuff and then you got your physical stuff, and then never shall the two meet. Well, the early church didn't see it that way. And I'm so thankful for, did you all remember, it's about a year ago now, that one Latter Rain church in China? One of the pastors that was arrested, in prison and stuff, they had written, if I recall, an open letter to the Chinese government that they had sent out. And it was just a wonderful letter about, you know, we will do everything we can to be good citizens that do not seek violence or anything else, but we cannot do anything against the authority of Jesus Christ, because the government of China is under his authority too. He rose from the dead. He is the judge of the living and the dead, and everyone in the Chinese government will be judged by him, and we pray that you will come to understand and repent of your sins and believe in him. And I'm just like, yes. Of course, he's in prison now too. But the point is, there are some forms of theology that will just say, well, you know, as long as you're doing everything okay spiritually, but you can't divide mankind up that way. And when you're put in a position of either celebrating that which Jesus says is sin, or standing against it, there's no place to hide. There's no place to hide anymore. That incense altar is sitting in front of each one of us. And the problem is, to consistently make application means we have to have thought through a consistent Christian worldview. Now, we've been talking about worldview issues for a long time, right? Now we see why it has to be a consistent worldview. Because the day is coming, and I know I sound like just a doom and gloomer. I'm being very realistic. If I had said some of this stuff 5 years ago, some of you would have been going, you're nuts. I'm not saying it now because you're seeing it happening. But the day, right now, you can sit there in the comfort of your home and see on Facebook that the Christians in China are having to walk up to what look like ATM machines and facially scan in to go to church. Because it's a part of their social credit thing. Their social credit score goes down when they walk into. So when they walk up to the door of that church, it's not just having your picture taken. Now it's just you're being facially scanned. And that may mean no advancement at work, demotion at work, less food for your children, less educational opportunities for your children, no travel, or eventually prison, torture. How many people are walking into any of our churches when they set that up outside? How many of us are walking in? It's real easy to sit here right now, here in America, and go, you bet, man. I'll be the first one in for choir practice. It's real easy, isn't it? What if that means you'll never see your grandkids again? Never see your wife. Yeah. I'm not going to be one of those who stands up here and says, I know what I'm going to be doing. Because if I do the right thing, it's only be by the grace of God in the first place. It's not because of anything in me. But I know enough about church history to know how difficult it was. Because I know if I had to make a decision to never see my grandkids again, it's amazing how many things you start thinking of, ways around. Well, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean such and so that I'm willing to go along with this now. There's lots of ways of compromise. Lots of ways to compromise. And we just need to be very careful that we're not amongst those who, in a boasting way, say, hey, I'll be fine. I'll do great. Anyway, it certainly seems to me that certain mega churches that I can name, where you go to never hear about sin, and never are called to mortify your sin or anything else, if they set those things outside, those places become ghost towns first Sunday. Because no one's going to pay personally to walk in there, because they're only going in there right now to be puffed up anyways. There would be a collapse of quote unquote externalized Christianity in a moment. And some of you might be sitting there going, that wouldn't be a bad thing. And in some ways that's true. It wouldn't be a bad thing if you want a pure church. If you want a church that's focused upon the truth. You say, you really think that's coming? Wow. I turn on the television and I listen to the political debate going on. Of course, I don't consider any of those things they call debates to be debates. I happen to know what a debate is. Those are badly run fashion shows. They are not debates by any stretch of the imagination. But if you just listen, it has rightly been said that we are watching what's going on in China. We're watching what's going on in Venezuela. And we see what's happening there. But the shock troops for those same people from those nations are running for public office in our own. And we have forgotten. We have forgotten. When Z-Gens can have a 37% approval rating for communism, we got a problem. When you can forget the people that killed over 120 million people the last century, they have better tech now. They've got better tech than they had last century. Yeah, well, we better know what we believe. The time of easy Christianity is no longer. Cultural Christianity is not going to last long. It's going to have to be a Christianity of absolute pure conviction. Now, sorry about the long rambling, but the whole reason for starting off that way is we really are addressing, like I said, we talk about what subjects I'm going to address, and I've addressed some of the same subjects multiple times. This is the first time on this one. Why? Well, because there has been a major change in what we're facing. And we have taken for granted having buildings, freedom of association, worship, communication. What happens when that's no longer there? And right now, in the church, what do we do when we see massive division taking place and we never saw it coming because we don't understand what is being said and why it's being said? What is social justice? What is social justice? Well, it is a phrase that unfortunately, amongst so many other phrases, has a natural meaning and an applied meaning. See, the natural meaning is what you want people to think of or to feel when they hear the phrase used. And so who could ever speak against social justice? Because all it sounds like is you're talking about the reign of justice within society. And isn't that something that everybody wants? And yet, when it is then utilized in politics, in academia, in philosophy, it doesn't mean simply the reigning of justice in society. As it is being used today, and as it is functioning within academia, yes, the same academia where someone like me will not even be allowed to speak. This is a reality. We've all watched the videos, have we not? Have we not seen what has happened on various university campuses? There is only one side that is allowed to speak. If you dare speak against any kind of the established leftist perspective, you will have riots, you will have people coming to the room and staying there banging drums or ringing bells or screaming profanities right, left, and center. That's what we're facing today. And within academia, social justice has nothing to do with what you and I think social justice is. Obviously there are entire books, and there are some good books coming out. A friend of mine, Viola, just put a book out. I haven't gotten hold of it yet, or it's coming out soon. He's got a book coming out that's very good on it that I read recently. The manuscript of it anyways. There are booklets coming out, there are videos, there's all sorts of stuff out there now if you want to get hold of it. But one of the reasons that this has sort of snuck in is that this movement has been around for a while. We knew about it, but we just didn't think that it could ever gain traction within the church. We have to recognize the relationship between social justice, critical theory, intersectionality, and neo-Marxism. They're all related. I'm not going to spend time, because you can go online and weary your mind with videos and things like that on the Frankfurt School and Derrida and Michel Foucault and all the myriads of takes on them and well, I'm not sure he meant this, I'm not sure he meant that. But what you discover is that there is a deep genealogical connection in what very plainly, and this is, you say, you can't talk about politics. Well, okay, this is a simple observation that the left itself makes. Every single Democratic presidential candidate is utterly 1,000% sold out to the entirety of the social justice, critical theory, intersectional worldview. Just listen to the debates. Totally sold out. There is not a dissenting voice. Not a dissenting voice. Well, that means all the Republicans are right. No, most of them don't even know what it's about. They're just doing what they're doing. The point is, social justice within the academic meaning of this is the ending of all oppression. The ending of all oppression. Well, you might go, isn't that what Jesus did? I mean, is this a good thing? We don't want the oppression of sin, the oppression of the devil. No, we're using the same words, but we're using a different dictionary. That's the problem. Because oppression is not something that you can be personally responsible for. It is part of the system. One of the main reasons that critical theory is so fundamentally opposed to Christianity, and when you try to put the two together, the result is a hybrid that makes no sense, is because of the fact that in critical theory, oppression is not a personal thing, it is a group thing. You are not viewed, the idea that you are the creature of God, and that you will stand before God to be judged by the judge of all the earth. It's not there. There is no God. There is no creator. You are not a creation. It is thoroughly Darwinian in its foundations and its application. Thoroughly. And one of the reasons that it's entering into all of our seminaries is because a lot of our professors are Darwinian too. They are. If you want to be accepted in the academy, that is a necessary credential. Since you are not created in the image of God, then there is no judgment. And so the idea of law and sin and personal responsibility has to be set aside. Well, that's the basis of our entire legal system. That's the basis of how Western society has functioned. That's what has held us together, is that there's a right and a wrong. I mean, why did the Marines fight and die by the thousands in Belleau Wood? That was World War I, the Forgotten War. And then do the same thing on Tarawa, Okinawa. There was the idea that there was a right and a wrong, that Nazism was wrong, that this was evil. Now, did everyone have the exact same perspective and the exact same purity of motivation? No. But there was a commonality of worldview that said there is a purpose. There's right and there's wrong. Critical theory doesn't have any of that. Critical theory doesn't have any of that. It's an entirely different moral system. And so in critical theory, you break everything down. So you can have critical race theory, you can have critical gender theory. And what has critical gender theory brought us? I'm losing track of how many, it was about 2 months ago that Piers Morgan, the BBC thing where he was like, the BBC just listed 133 genders, and they have this guy on, and Piers Morgan's going, explain what a two-spirit something is, and the guy's got no clue. He has no idea. They sent the wrong representative. But is there anyone who really would know, come to think of it? I mean, and Piers is going, this is ridiculous. And Piers Morgan is not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination. But even he's going, this is nuts. But the point is, anything you can put between critical and theory will be broken down in the process, because that's what critical theory does. There is nothing in critical theory that can build anything up. There's nothing in critical theory that can create harmony or create union. Critical theory is designed simply to break something down into its constituent parts. So critical race theory has resulted in greater division along ethnic lines than we've ever seen. Critical gender theory, same thing. And since you don't have a transcendent God, then it in essence creates autonomy, so that you can determine whatever you want for yourself in the sense of gender, even though there is a created reality for you. And all of this is meant to help you to, who should we listen to in society? Those who have the greatest intersectional score. And what is intersectionality? I hadn't even heard of intersectionality 2 years ago. You know who I had to ask about intersectionality? I had to ask my daughter. So Summer, what's intersectionality? Never heard of it before. Intersectionality, the intersection of all of the kinds of oppression that you face in your life depending upon which groups you're a part of. So what's weird is on one level, you're autonomous because Bruce Jenner chose to join a group that is oppressed, transgenders. But then in other areas, you have no personal autonomy or even responsibility at all. So in critical theory, you have the oppressors and the oppressed. And you're just simply a part of that group. Whether you've ever done anything, whether you are personally responsible for oppressing someone, whether you have been deeply active in trying to make sure that other people didn't get oppressed, doesn't matter. You're either in the oppressor group or you are one of the oppressed. And the more oppressed groups you're in, the more valuable your voice is. Now what's interesting is this has resulted, if you're sitting here going, you know, if he goes on another 15 minutes, I'm going to be so depressed, I'm going to get into my car and drive into a tree. Who is applauding that? If you want some glimmer of hope here, this stuff can't last. Not only is it irrational, we're made in the image of God. And see, that's why the government wants your children, because it takes years of indoctrination to get people made in the image of God to act in a way other than being made in the image of God because you normally act. This stuff's so stupid that you've got to cram it into people repeatedly. Is that not what we see in academia right now? Is that not why they want to have your children? Is that not why one of the Democratic candidates was talking about extending the school day until 6 o'clock at night? Just hand them all over. You know, I didn't make this one up, but Vodi Balcom, and if you want to argue with Vodi, ever seen Vodi? I have, numerous times. I was in Zambia last year, and he and I were doing a mock debate at African Christian University, and I was sitting there, and he was being the Muslim, I was being the Christian, and I was sitting here looking at him and just going, man, that's a mountain of a man. I didn't even want to get up and refute what he had just said, but it's huge. But Vodi's the one, I don't know if he's the one who made this up, but Vodi is the one who said, do not be surprised if you send your children off to Caesar every day if they come back as Romans. There was a day when that wasn't the case. When I was a kid, I was able to be raised pretty well without getting it crammed into my head, but not anymore. Not anymore. So the glimmer of hope, to keep you from running your car into a tree tonight, the glimmer of hope is this cannot build anything. That's what it's designed to do. Here's my feeling. This is designed to break down Western civilization so something else can take its place. That something else will be a totalitarian system. But every totalitarian system eventually self-destructs. So the glimmer of hope is we remain faithful, and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be hard, but it cannot last. It will eventually break down. But last century, those totalitarian systems took 120 million people with it before they broke down. How many this time? I don't know. But this is destructive stuff. And so anything you put between critical and theory will be broken down and destroyed. One of the most, for me, somewhat entertaining examples of this It only happened, I think it was a year ago. I like recent examples. But it sort of takes me back because I was a tennis player when I was in high school. Fairly decent when I went to state as a sophomore, so that wasn't too bad. But back in my day, let's see how many old folks are here. Back in my day in women's tennis, we had men's tennis. We had Jimmy Connor and Bjorn Borg and Johnny McEnroe, the bad boy of tennis and stuff like that. But then you had the real nice ladies. And we had Chrissy Everett. Oh, wasn't she the cutest little thing, And who was Chrissy Everett's nemesis? Martina Navratilova. And of course, the big news way back in the day was when Martina Navratilova came out as a lesbian. And so she's always been one of the, societal celebs, and in the forefront of gay rights and things like that. And then remember what she did last December? I think it was right about a year ago now. She made a big mistake. She ruined her intersectionality score. She did. She made a really obvious observation. Men shouldn't play sports against women. Now you see, she was a great tennis player. She was. Won Wimbledon a number of times, US Open, French, all that stuff. Good tennis player. But Martina Navratilova knows something. That at her best, any one of the top 150 men would have wiped her off the court. You know why? Because they're men. And they serve the ball 20 miles per hour faster than she can. And they can return her serve faster than she can hit it to them. Because they're bigger and they're stronger. Because testosterone. And when you're in puberty, and you get that testosterone going, you get longer, thicker bones, you get more connective tissue, you get more muscle mass. And just on a simple level of physics, if you're going to go like this, if this is bigger and stronger than that person's, you can probably play better. So she knows that if in her day, Bjorn Borg, and he did have long hair, if Bjorn Borg had decided he was Bjornette Borg, that he would have won Wimbledon 10 years in a row as a woman. And so she said, that's cheating. Oh, did you see the firestorm? Now you see, there actually is, within the LGBTQ plus, whatever in the world that means, within that movement, there is a fundamental division. Actually, there's nothing that joins them together. The unity of that group is completely false. It's made up. Because, what does bisexual have to do with either lesbian or gay? There's really nothing connected there other than we reject God's law in regards to sexuality. But transgenderism and lesbianism especially don't fit. Because just think about the definitional elements of both. And so here was a lesbian saying that transgenders should not be given equal rights. She was kicked off of groups that she had been representative of, the whole 9 yards. And now, I started following, and I don't, believe me, every day I question why I'm doing this. Every day. But last year, a biological male won the 35 to 39-year-old UCI cycling championships, track cycling championships, as a woman. His name that he used then was Rachel McKinnon. Last week he changed it to Ivy something. But I follow this guy on Twitter. Why? Do you like poking your eyes with pins? I've never tried to engage him. Now, I did have a friend of mine who's arranged some debates for me elsewhere, contact him about whether he would debate on the issue. And he said he would for $25,000 plus expenses. So that didn't happen. Unless some of you would like to, hey, I'd like to see that. I'm filthy rich. Here, we'll do it. But following this feed every day is an education. It's a painful education, but it's an education. This person uses the term TERFs. Ever heard of TERFs? T-E-R-F-S. What does it refer to? Transgender something radical feminists. Exclusionary, thank you. Watch that one right there. Did you Google it? No, you probably heard it. I never heard this before, but it is a swear word for this guy who is a gal. And it's for any woman who will not, it's for any woman like Martina Navratilova who will not absolutely toe the line in regards to the transgender agenda, whatever that might be in any particular given moment. Division, 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 division. They want to have more and more and more attention for themselves. And it becomes the idea that I am just so intersectionally powerful. I think of Aladdin, you know, the genie in Aladdin, you know, cosmic intersectional power. As if this is some awesome thing, because it means I am more oppressed than anybody else. I am the ultimate victim, and therefore I should be given the ultimate praise for being who I am. It's astonishing. Folks, societies who pander to people like that will not long last. Will not long last. They will be taken over by societies that have morals and ethics and recognize that this kind of thing is foolishness. But the church is still in the middle of all this. The church is still in the middle of all this. And what's happening is, well, let me just ask one question. Just put your hand up if this is a meaningful phrase to you. Resolution number 9. 1/4 to a third. 1/4 to a third. Resolution number 9, Southern Baptist Convention this past June. Oh, that wasn't fair. Try it again. Oh, of course. I knew that. Resolution number 9. You thought I was talking about it. It does sound like a singing group, doesn't it? Like the Beatles. And I didn't say revolution, I said resolution. Resolution. Oh, good grief. You see, I didn't know that, so that tells it. I was raised as a fundamentalist. They were Satan. So, John Denver was Satan when I was a kid, so. Seriously, all right. I'm not making that up. So revolution number, I guess I have heard of that, I don't know, anyways. But no, resolution number 9 was at the Southern Baptist Convention this past summer in regards to critical theory. And it identified critical theory as a usable tool in the analysis of social things and so on and so forth. And the reality is that in the ERLC and especially at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, there are numerous professors and people in positions of authority who, on the one hand, will say, you know, we stand firmly on the basis of the Baptist faith and message, things like that. But then on the other hand, will promote or at least direct people to theological materials that have been deeply influenced by critical theory, intersectionality, and the social justice movement. And we saw, as I said, beginning of last year, March of last year, all of a sudden an explosion of this stuff. Now let me give you a related area that is far more poisonous. It's one thing to talk about transgenderism. Most of us go, really? Most of us go, for the less than 0.75% of the human family that actually have genetic abnormality and are intersexed, we should have nothing but compassion. But they have been so abused by this transgender movement, they should be the ones at the forefront of denouncing it. Because 99% of transgendered people have no genetic abnormality at all. It is simple, direct rebellion against how God made them. So it is one thing to have those genetic situations that result in ambiguity of genitalia and so on and so forth. That happens. And the church should be a welcoming place. Come alongside to help a person in that situation. It's totally different than J.D. Greer, the president of Southern Baptist Convention, 3 weeks ago, coming out and saying we should exercise gender hospitality. You're all looking at me like I just landed from outer space. How many of you know what I'm talking about? A small number. You all know who J.D. Greer is, right? President of the Southern Baptist Convention. He put out an article. He basically was following Preston Sprinkle. But the idea is, how do you deal with someone who demands that you utilize their chosen pronouns? Whether it's a Bruce Jenner who says you should refer to him as her, or the thing that leaves me completely befuddled when someone says you should use Z and zer, or they and their. We can't even talk to each other anymore. How in the world is any teacher, any professor, standing in front of a class, supposed to keep track of 24 different sets of pronouns for the people sitting in front of them? It is absurdity. But the idea is, well, what if you have somebody, maybe it's somebody in your family. It's your next door neighbor. It's a person at work. And you know this is a biological male, and they demand that you refer to them as she and her. Every one of us is liable to face this. Every one of us. J.D. Greer said that we should use pronoun hospitality. And that is, it's not a hill to die on. The important thing is to open up lines of communication and present the gospel. Okay, I want to open up lines to communicate the gospel. There's no question about that. Do you do that by giving in to their foremost personalized act of rebellion at the start? Because you see, who they are is not determined by them. It's determined by God. God made them. And they are not honoring themselves, let alone God, by demanding that you celebrate their rebellion. How are you going to get to the point of saying, God is your creator, God made you, therefore God has the right to say what is sin and is not, when you've already at the start gone, yeah, but okay, I'll accept your autonomy in this situation? No. There is a perfectly fair and kind way to say, I appreciate that request, but I would like to make a counter request, and that is, I would like to be able to talk to you without you demanding that I deny that my God made you. Because that's what you're asking me to do. Now you're right into the subject. You might as well go from there. But the fundamental issue comes down to, where are you going to start this conversation? And who are you most concerned about pleasing or offending? Or offending. That's the issue. That's the issue. But, as I was trying to say, okay, that one particular area, attending those things called gay weddings, which I'm sorry, marriage is the first institution established by God. He gets to define it. Jesus defined it in Matthew chapter 19. You try to change it. Did any of you see when I got to, about 3 years ago, I was on the Dr. Drew show? Did any of you see that? A couple of you did. First I was on by Skype. Big mistake. Because anybody can talk over you while you're on Skype. So that was a big mistake. But they called back and wanted me to come back on the next week. And I said, well, I will, but only if I'm in studio. Well, we don't have money for that. I said, don't worry, my wife works the airlines. Well, we don't have room for a hotel. We'll take care of it. Well, okay, if you want to come in, we'll have you in studio. So I flew over to Southern California. They did let me through into the Soviet Socialist Republic of Southern California, and I was on live in studio, and I was on with the same transgender dude that is so famous for 2 weeks later threatening to beat up Ben Shapiro. Okay, same guy, who is a former Army chopper pilot. And if you've seen the clip where he puts his big old man hand on Ben Shapiro's shoulder and says, you say that to me again, and you're gonna be leaving here in an ambulance. I can't even get my voice low enough to sound like him. But it was a very manly threat. And here he is in a dress and long hair, saying about how he's a woman. I've never seen a woman be able to do that, but anyways, same guy was on with me. And if you recall, at one point, I brought up Matthew 19, I brought up Jesus' teaching about marriage. And I knew who Dr. Drew was. I didn't know who his companions or his other people are. And the show doesn't exist anymore, so don't blame me. He said, well, that's Jesus' opinion. And my response was, well, I just point out to you, sir, that not only did Jesus predict his own death, but also his burial and resurrection. And when you, sir, die and rise from the grave and leave behind an empty tomb, that gives you a level of expertise that Jesus has and you don't. That's the reality. And Jesus defined what marriage is. So it's one thing for us. It's one thing for us to talk about that area. It's another thing for us to talk about critical race theory. Over the past couple of weeks, I had some brief exchanges with a man by the name of Bishop Talbert Wesley Swan II. Anybody ever heard of Bishop Talbert Swan? Okay. Graduate, ready for this, of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. But also Union Theological Seminary. Now, if you don't know anything about theological seminaries, Gordon Conwell, long history. Interesting how many of Gordon Conwell's graduates have ended up in weird places. Jerry Matitix, Scott Hahn, Roman Catholicism, that's interesting. But anyway, but Union's easy to remember. Remember a couple months ago when they had the chapel where they were confessing to plants? Do you see the pictures of, they had the plants in the center of the chapel and everyone's around them and they're confessing their ecological sins to plants. That was a Union Theological Seminary chapel. Okay? Union went apostate in the 1890s. Okay? So I call them the Walker Seminary. Walker as in the zombies. The Walking Dead. It's the seminary that's still walking around, but it died in the 1890s, okay? So they just keep on going. And I'm not sure, is The Walking Dead still going on? Yeah, it is? Oh, okay. Because I figure walkers eventually just sort of fall apart, don't they? I mean, don't they just sort of everything falls off and then there's nothing to worry about. So unfortunately, that's not the case with the Union Theological Seminary. And so this Bishop Swan, I don't even know how to describe it. If you've not seen the brief exchanges, maybe I could pull up some of the screenshots. The last thing I said, I just sort of gave up eventually. But the last thing I said was, I'm not sure this man actually exists. I think he is an algorithm, sort of like, have you seen the Luther insult website you can go to? Yes. Where you can just go and it pulls up all these insults that Luther used in various books and stuff like that. You can, a new one every day for somebody, because Luther was quite good at insults. Erasmus was too. I'm surprised there's not an Erasmus insult website. But I think he's an algorithm, because all he can do is just accuse you of white supremacy and just insult you right, left, and center, and never, ever, ever engage with what you're saying. But he's a graduate of Union Theological Seminary. Who is the most famous recent teacher at Union Theological Seminary? James Cone. James Cone. In fact, they just filled his professorship because he died last year. And they just announced the person who was taking his professorship. Now, tomorrow, I will have to spend some time. How many of you have ever read any of James Cone? That's sort of like when I ask people about if you read the Quran. Little parts. That's about all you can do with James Cone. James Cone is the father of black theology. And when he died, the people at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, one of the Southern Baptist seminaries, put out 3 podcasts honoring James Cone. Now you might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Wait till I read you James Cone. I only found out about James Cone myself in 2008. Why would I have been looking for something like this in 2008? Who was elected in 2008? Barack Obama. And who was Barack Obama's pastor? Jeremiah Wright. Well, why was Jeremiah Wright saying the things Jeremiah Wright was saying? Because Jeremiah Wright was a student of James Cone. And James Cone was a very smart man. By all accounts, a very nice man. But he was more racist than any man I've ever read in my life. I will read you where he says, if you're a white man, the only way you can be saved, the only way you can be right with God is going through black people. Because God's black, so is Jesus. Because God's only with the oppressed, and you're the oppressors. And he's not even sure if there are any saved white people. You go, no way. Yes way. Oh yeah. Got his books right here. Got his books right here. I don't enjoy reading that stuff, but when you have people at our, if in 2000, when I first came here, if you had asked me, what seminaries would you recommend to someone? I can only think of one seminary that I would have mentioned then that is not influenced today by professors who appreciate and utilize the insights of James Cone. Only one. Only one. That's how rapidly this has changed. That's how fast this has gone. Hopefully it has not been overly obvious this evening. I'm not at 100%, and I'm not talking mentally. physically. And we have as a possible backup plan tomorrow, depending on how tonight's sleep goes. Tomorrow's a long day. And if worst comes to worst, and I make the decision that this would be best, because I also have Sunday morning, and if the batteries are getting down to the red zone, in the afternoon, I have a presentation by Vodi Balcom on social justice, and then a panel that Vodi, myself, Tom Askell, Josh Weiss, others were involved with, that would be just as good, if not better, than anything that I would be saying anyways, that I will fill in the afternoon with so I can sleep and be with you in the evening. I hope I don't have to do that. I hope I get a good night's rest tonight and that I'm on the mend, because I want to be on the mend. I've been on the downside for 4 days now. But when I listened to Vodi, I feel sorry for Vodi. Because last year I went to Lusaka, sitting in his home. We're talking about an upcoming meeting we were going to be having. And some of you have heard about the meeting in Dallas that resulted in actually that was the year before last, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh well. The years all meld together when you travel as much as I do. Anyways, the look on his face was sort of like, y'all are starting to figure out what I've been saying for years now, aren't you? I've been trying to warn you this was coming. And that was just sort of look, and I get it. I get it. The way I have seen him and people like Daryl Harrison, Samuel Say, Kofi Abuwanan, the way I've seen those black brothers treated for daring to speak out against critical race theory and things like that, it's just stunning. It's just stunning. I'll talk a little bit more about that once I have James Cohn. What I was going to do was and maybe we'll start with this in the morning. When I first started addressing this subject, what I did, the reason I did so is because I could immediately see that what I was hearing, whether it was in the race area, in the gender area, whatever, this divisive perspective strikes at the very heart of the unity of the Christian church. When I travel around the world, and I don't go to every part of the world, because I'm not the world's best traveler. I've gotten pretty good at it. But we generally don't send me to places where if you drink the water, you're going to be sick for 3 weeks. So, but I do go to South Africa. And I speak to very, very mixed audiences. And South Africa has, I think, 18 official languages. So we're not just talking about black Africans. We're talking about a huge number of Indians, especially down in Durban. But then people from all over Africa. And you know its history. I can go down there and I can minister the Word of God without any problems whatsoever. But you know what's happening? Division is starting to take place. You know where it's coming from? We've exported it from the United States to South Africa. To South Africa. And now we're having to address the same issues there. Because American ministries, well-known ministries, have started exporting these concepts and these ideas. It's a shame, but that's what's taking place. How did the early church come around one table? How did the early church do it? Because think about it. If you were the Apostle Paul, every church you founded, there were all sorts of people in those churches from different ethnicities that had long histories of divisions and strife between them. And now they had to live together in peace because the Romans would come along and kill you if you didn't. But there was still a lot of animosity. How'd they come to one table? How did they have unity in the early church? And the answer is, from where did they gain their identity? They gained their identity from the fact that they were all sinners. They were all redeemed. They all had the same righteousness imputed to them, and they all had the same Holy Spirit within them. And that's what now defined them. And what their great-grandpappy did to somebody else's great-grandpappy no longer had any meaning in the body. When we lose that, we lose the unity of the body, and we lose the gospel. And that was the first thing I saw. It's the first thing I addressed. That's why I've had this up on the screen. Well, that's actually me and my wife. I'm in my kilt. Look at that. We've been married almost 38 years now, and she still. I obviously have done all the aging for our couple, and she doesn't know how to do that. Did we lose the connection there? You just got tired of it. I understand. I had up there Colossians chapter 3. There it is. And this renewing that takes place. This renewing, this is where we'll start in the morning. If you'd like to read Colossians chapter 3, beginning at verse 10, this is where we'll start in the morning. At least I'll try to remember to start in the morning. What's the theological foundation? What is the basis for the unity in the body? Why can't we embrace critical theory? Why can't we embrace the idea that if you're white, you're the oppressor? And if you're anything other, you're the oppressed. And therefore, you are to adopt that as the paradigm in the church. How is that fundamentally opposed to the unity we have in the gospel? And why is it that less than 2 years ago, I made the statement to a leading black Christian leader. I had told the story, my own story, about my first best friend. I made the mistake of doing this. I've discovered that it's too late now. It's out there, but I'm not sure I would do this in the future, given how people behave on the internet. But my first best friend was named Kevin. And Kevin was brown. Because when I met Kevin's parents, Kevin's mom looked like she had never seen the sun. She was the whitest woman I've ever seen. Almost albino. But his dad was the biggest, blackest Minnesota cop I had ever seen. He scared me to death. He was a mountain of a man. Mountain of a man. I remember when we moved, he gave me, I still have it, still own it, a little, not cufflink, it's what you put on your tie pin, tie tack, of handcuffs. The handcuff tie. Oh, that was so great. He was a cop, so. So the first family I knew outside of my family was my best friend Kevin's family, and he had a really black daddy and a really white mommy. And so, big deal. Now that was the 1960s. It was a big deal. I didn't know it was a big deal because Kevin and I just played in the side yard, so I had made the statement that I don't believe in this idea of creating ethnic spaces in the church. I see a fundamental problem in doing this. And I especially made reference to the table. As I put together a meme, and I said, the Lord's table is a Christ space. Space is the new word. You know, you have your black space, your white space, your trans space, your whatever. And then, of course, safe space, which means the place you go when you don't want to hear any other thoughts but your own. So it is. I don't want to have to realize anyone believes anything differently than me. That's a safe space. It's amazing. We are literally producing a culture of 4-year-olds. We are. That's what our universities are. If you need a safe space, you're a 4-year-old. Anyway, so I made a meme that said, the Lord's Supper, Lord's table, is a Christ space. It's focused solely and completely upon Him and what He has done. And there is no room, if you bring ethnicity into that place, you do not understand what He accomplished. I had those men call for an ecumenical council of the church in Philadelphia to declare me a heretic. I'm absolutely serious. You don't believe me? The story is in Eric Mason's book, Woke Church. It's not an accurate story, but it's in his book, Woke Church. That's what we're facing. We'll start with Colossians chapter 3 on the morrow, so I hope you have a good evening of sleep and rest. I hope you will allow me to get a good evening of sleep and rest. In other words, I'm going to sort of need to be slipping out fairly quickly. Sorry if we hold off some of the selfies and stuff till tomorrow. I'd appreciate that. We can do the book signing thing and chatting thing tomorrow if we possibly could do that. I'd appreciate that. I do apologize for the heaviness. I mean, it would be a whole lot easier to, there are less heavy topics, I get it. But you and I both know, I don't care where you work. You work for a major corporation, you're already facing all this stuff. It's all around us. There's no place to hide. You might say, yeah, we're in the middle part. It doesn't matter where you are. Al Mohler's been saying it for a long time. There's going to be no place to hide. And there isn't. There is no place to hide. And should we want to be hiding? What is it going to mean to you and I in the next number of years to confess the Lordship of Jesus Christ before the world? What's it going to mean? I guess the bigger question is, what's going to cost? And what does it mean within the church? How do we maintain the unity of faith? And how do we recognize when movements are coming in that will fundamentally alter the very paradigm of what unity is supposed to mean? How will we know? These are things to think about. Let's close our time with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we face a difficult day. And Lord, we confess that we are in and of ourselves insufficient. We know that your word is sufficient, your Spirit is sufficient, but Lord, we recognize that we are making application to challenging situations that sometimes it's difficult to look back in history and find exactly how those before us would have handled these things. It's hard. And we want to honor and glorify you. We want to honor and glorify the gospel. We want to maintain the unity of faith. We want to proclaim the gospel with power and clarity. There's so much false teaching. There's so much confusion. Lord, we need your help. Help us to understand so that at the very least we can pray appropriately. Prepare our own hearts, our own families. And Lord, for those in leadership in the church, there will be difficult decisions to make in the future. Many sacrifices to be made. Lord, help us. We know that if we love you first and foremost, and then through your Spirit love one another, we will find a way. Thank you for this time. We pray that you will give us rest and strength for the tasks of tomorrow. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.